When most of us think about Tolkien's Middle-earth, we imagine it as a closed world. It begins in deep myth, it rises to epic conflict, and ends quietly with the departure of the elves and the passing of magic. The ring is destroyed. Aragorn reigns. The Fourth Age dawns, and then fade to black. But Tolkien did not think the story ended there. In fact, Tolkien believed something far stranger and far more daring. He believed that Middle-earth is our world, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but historically. Separated from us not by space, but by time. Today on The Backyard Professor, we will be talking about the Seventh Age of Middle-earth, the question we never ask. If it's true, then The Lord of the Rings did not happen in a fantasy past, it happened in our past, which raises a question almost no one asks. If the Third Age and the Fourth Age are behind us, then what age are we living in now? Tolkien answered that question, and his answer leads us to the Seventh Age of Middle-earth. The ages of the world are not fantasy inventions, so let's start with what Tolkien actually says, although we have to look in various different works of his other than his main stories. In 1958, he wrote a letter to a fellow writer and scholar, Rona Beer. In it, he makes an offhand remark that turns out to be anything but casual. He writes, "I imagine the gap between the fall of Barad-dûr and our days to be about 6,000 years. I imagine that we are now at the end of the Sixth Age or in the Seventh." That sentence alone should stop us cold. Tolkien is not speculating about lore. He is placing us on the timeline. 2 years later, in 1960, he refines the calculation and states even more clearly that we are living in the Seventh Age. Now, this raises an immediate question. Why 7 ages? Why not 5 or 10 or 12? The answer has nothing to do with fantasy and everything to do with Tolkien's religious and intellectual world. Tolkien was a lifelong Catholic, and long before modern history divided time into ancient, medieval, and modern, Christian theology divided history into numbered ages of the world. This system goes back to Augustine of Hippo, who proposed 6 ages, marked by great turning points in sacred history: the flood, the calling of Abraham, the reign of David, the Babylonian captivity, and so on. Later, Bede suggested a 7th age, overlapping with the 6th, a kind of a final era of fulfillment. This wasn't abstract theology, it was liturgical. Throughout Tolkien's life during Christmas Eve Mass, the proclamation of Christ's birth explicitly declared that it occurred in the 6th age of the world. Tolkien would have heard that every year. So when Tolkien divides his legendarium into numbered ages, he's not inventing a fantasy convention. He is placing Middle-earth inside a real theological understanding of history, and that means the 7th age matters. Tolkien did not think Middle-earth was like our world. He thought it was our world. He was explicit about this, though never loudly. In the prologue to The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien does something extraordinary. He doesn't say hobbits used to exist. He says they still do. He writes that hobbits are an unobtrusive but very ancient people, shy of the big folk, as they call us, and now they avoid us with dismay and are becoming hard to find. As they call us. That's not a narrative trick. That's Tolkien collapsing the boundary between reader and myth. This fits with Tolkien's long-standing translator conceit that he is not inventing these stories, but he's recovering them from ancient manuscripts. But here's the key insight. Tolkien places his mythology just far enough back in time to avoid falsification. There is no archaeological contradiction because magic fades instead of ending violently. Great beings diminish instead of leaving bones behind. Myth dissolves into memory not into record. And this is deliberate. If Tolkien had placed Middle-earth too close to recorded history, it would collapse under evidence. If he placed it too far back, it would lose emotional continuity. Instead, Tolkien places Middle-earth in the deep mythic past where truth is not empirical but meaningful. Middle-earth cannot be proven, and it cannot be disproven. It can only be entered. The Old Hope is where Eru enters Arda. Now we arrive at the most electrifying and least discussed text in Tolkien's entire corpus, a late philosophical dialogue called The Debate of Finrod and Andreth. This is not a narrative, it's not myth, it is theology. This is found in the incredible book Morgoth Serene by Christopher Tolkien. The speakers are Finrod Felagund, an immortal elf king, and Andreth, a mortal human philosopher. And here they debate the meaning of death. Toward the end, Andreth reveals what she calls the Old Hope. She says, "They say that the One will enter himself into Arda and heal men and all the marring from the beginning of the world." Let that sink in. This prophecy does not come from the Valar. It does not come from elves, or it does come from men. And Finrod's response is just as astonishing. He reasons, he deduces, that for this to be possible, the divine nature would have to remain transcendent and enter creation. In other words, something very much like the Christian conception of the Trinity. Tolkien then adds an endnote explaining that Finrod likely imagined that Eru would enter Arda in human form. And to remove all doubt, Christopher Tolkien later wrote, "This is not parody, not even parallel, but the extension of the theology of Arda into specifically Christian belief. This is not allegory. This is Tolkien saying the incarnation belongs to the same world as Middle-earth, not as metaphor, not as a symbol, but as fulfillment." So why did not Tolkien ever write the event? If Tolkien believed this, why didn't he depict Eru entering Arda? The answer reveals Tolkien's restraint. To write the incarnation directly would collapse myth into chronicle. It would turn sacred mystery into scene setting. Tolkien believed that some events must remain off stage or they lose their power. Middle-earth exists before redemption. Our world exists after. The meeting point cannot be dramatized, only implied. That is why Tolkien never crosses that line. The seventh age is ours. So where does that leave us? If Middle-earth is our world, the age continues, and the incarnation marks a turning point. Then the seventh age is not fantasy, it is now. This is why Tolkien aligns the changeover with the Anno Domini calendar. This is why magic fades. This is why wonder becomes quieter. And this is why Tolkien places so much weight on small acts, which brings us to Samwise Gamgee. On the stairs of Cirith Ungol, Sam realizes something deeply profound when he says, "We're in the same tale still. It's going on." The light that he carries in the Phial of Galadriel, well, that comes from the two trees from the creation. It passed through the Silmarils, through Eärendil, through Galadriel, into his hands, and that same light appears today as Venus in our night sky. The chain is unbroken. What Tolkien is asking of us, he is not asking us to believe Middle-earth really happened. He is asking something more meaningful. He is asking us to live as though meaning persists even when magic fades, as though courage matters even when history forgets, as though the great tale did not end, but passed into quieter hands. If we are in the seventh age, then wonder has not vanished, it has gone underground. And perhaps, like hobbits, the greatest things now happen out of sight. Tolkien is not claiming that Middle-earth is a literal, datable, prehistoric civilization, that elves and hobbits existed as biologically distinct species, or that archaeology or paleoanthropology is mistaken, or even that modern chronology should be revised. So if someone objects as though Tolkien is making that claim, Tolkien probably understood, would say, that objection assumes that I am doing something I explicitly refuse to do. Tolkien was a medievalist, a philologist, and a mythmaker. He was not a crank historian. His ages are mythic historical, not paleontological. Here the key conception distinction is that Tolkien's timeline is not about human biological origins, it's about human meaning. So that when he speaks of ages, he is not counting skulls or tools, he's counting moral, spiritual, and imaginative epochs. This is why the ages shorten, why magic fades, why memory compresses, and also why wonder recedes. So Tolkien's history is operating on a different axis than scientific history. Science asks, when did Homo sapiens appear? Tolkien asks, when did the world stop singing? Those questions do not compete with each other. The compression is a feature, it's not a bug of what Tolkien presented to us. For instance, from the Third Age to the Sixth Age, Tolkien is talking about only a few thousand years. A skeptic might say that's absurdly short compared to real human history, but Tolkien intentionally compresses mythic history as history advances, because myth stretches backwards, history contracts forward. That is exactly how real cultures experience time. Think about it. Prehistory is vast, but indistinct. Recorded history is short, but dense. Modern history feels crowded, accelerated, overwhelming. Tolkien mirrors that psychological reality, not a geological one. Tolkien is not writing a geological clock. He is writing a memory clock. He's writing applicability, not falsifiable history. Now, he did reject allegory, but he embraced applicability. So the story must fit reality without being testable like a scientific claim. Middle-earth is placed close enough to feel continuous, but far enough back to avoid contradiction. This is not evasion, it is mythic discipline. If Tolkien had written Middle-earth as archaeologically testable, it would stop being myth and become bad pseudo-history. He knew that, and he refused to cross that line. Human prehistory is not equal to Tolkien's men. It's a subtle and powerful point. When Tolkien speaks of men, he does not mean biological Homo sapiens in the modern scientific sense at all. He means beings with moral agency. He means story consciousness. He also means a sense of death as tragedy. He also means a longing for permanence. This is a philosophical definition, not a zoological one. So the question Tolkien is addressing is not, when did humans evolve? He's rather asking, when did humans become historical beings? Now, those are very different questions. Tolkien's timeline is deliberately non-exact. He never finalized exact year lengths of ages or clear transitions from the fifth and the sixth ages, for instance. He didn't actually finalize historical markers compared to archaeology. Even Carl Hostetter, the editor of The Nature of Middle-earth, a very fine summation of Tolkien's latest thinking on his legendarium. He asked you to believe the math. No, he did not do that. He treats Tolkien's calculations as conceptual scaffolding, not dogma. He asks you, Tolkien that is, to enter the vision. If someone objects that Tolkien's Seventh Age doesn't line up with modern archaeology, I actually agree. But I agree with the objection's premise, not its conclusion. Tolkien was not writing archaeological history. He was writing a myth that overlays our world in terms of meaning, not material evidence. See, that's why it can never be proven false and why it doesn't need to be proven true. That's not evasive, that's precise. Because what Tolkien is really protecting is a world where meaning does not evaporate. He's projecting a history where goodness matters, even after memory fades. He is protecting meaning of a past that explains why our world feels disenchanted, not when it happened. He places Middle-earth just behind the veil of recorded history so that science does keep its authority, so that math does keep its power, so that faith keeps its freedom. In fact, so that imagination keeps its dignity. And this balance, this is extremely rare. Tolkien's legendarium is not in conflict with history. It is in conversation with it at a different depth. Tolkien is not trying to win an argument. He's doing something better, with showing what kind of truth he thought myth could carry. The important thing is recognizing that he was working in a different register of truth altogether, one that modern people are often no longer trained to even recognize. Tolkien is giving us, the reader and viewer, permission to enter the myth without being asked to suspend reason or deny science. That's not compromise, that's craftsmanship. Modern people aren't just skeptical of Tolkien's register of truth, they're often unaware that such a register exists at all. That's the missing literacy. Most modern people are not trained to recognize it or even to know that such a register exists. That's not an insult, it's a cultural observation. We live in a world trained almost exclusively to recognize empirical truth, whatever is measurable, or else historical truth, whatever is documented. But Tolkien is working in mythic truth. This is the kind of truth that orients and grounds meaning. This explains why reality feels the way that it does. This is why people react with confusion rather than disagreement. They're trying to read a musical score as if it were a spreadsheet. Tolkien was ahead of an audience that will think, is this supposed to be literal? Is this religious apologetics? He hoped instead we would think, oh, this is about how to read the world. That's the point. Tolkien was not asking us to believe that Middle-earth literally happened in the way modern history works. He was doing something both older and rarer than that. He was working in a different register of truth, one that modern people are often no longer trained to recognize or even know exists as its own category. In that register, a story doesn't have to be scientifically provable to be meaningful. It has to fit. It has to resonate with the shape of the world we actually experience. Middle-earth is placed just far enough behind recorded history that to disprove it is to miss the point entirely. And it's just close enough that it will still explain something about us. Not how we evolved, but how we lost wonder. Not when history began, but why it feels so thin now in our lives. Tolkien wasn't trying to smuggle fantasy into history either. He was trying to rescue meaning from a world that had forgotten how to read myth. And if we really are in the Seventh Age, then the story didn't end, it went quiet, and it passed into our hands. Now, why do we feel this even if we can't name it? People often respond emotionally to Tolkien before they can explain why. And that's because the register still works. But the training is gone. We feel nostalgia for something we never lived and a longing for a world that we can't name. So this video isn't convincing you, the listeners, of a thesis. It's reintroducing a way of seeing. And that's why this matters. This is why it bothers so many when people dismiss Joseph Campbell or Mircea Eliade so cavalierly and without any thought at all. They say, oh, that's just myth, thinking that it means it is fake and therefore not even worth our time. I think this is the idea of the remythologization of history, or meaning that Leonora Leet and others call for. When people say, oh, that's just myth, they usually mean one of two things, often without realizing it. This isn't literally factual. And the second item is, therefore, it has no serious truth value. That second step is the mistake, and it's a very modern one, because myth does not equal falsehood. That is a historically recent reinterpretation that entirely is false. For most of human history, myth was not opposed to truth. It was opposed to chronicle. Myth answered 4 questions that chronicle cannot answer. Why does existence feel meaningful? Why does suffering matter? Why do humans long for transcendence? And why does moral choice feel real? This is why dismissing Joseph Campbell or Mircea Eliade with a hand-waving is not critical thinking, it's a category error. Campbell was not saying myths are facts. Eliade was not saying rituals are science. They were saying something much more remarkable and real. Myth is how human beings experience reality as meaningful. Eliade's sacred time versus our modern flat time is the most important insight that is also mostly ignored. Profane time, the ordinary, the linear, the chronological, is separate from the sacred time, the cyclical, the meaningful, and the re-enterable. Modernity lives almost entirely within profane time. So this is what makes history and events feel thin and random. It's also why meaning feels optional. Myth doesn't compete with history, though. It restores depth to time. Tolkien understood this intuitively. Middle-earth exists in sacred time that gradually collapses into profane time, our time. That's not false, that's diagnostic. Campbell was describing the map, not the territory. This is one reason why he gets dismissed, is because it's assumed he was saying all myths are the same, therefore none of them are true. But Campbell's actual claim is closer to meaning something like human consciousness expresses meaning through recurring symbolic structures. That doesn't make myths interchangeable. It makes them legible. Tolkien did not reject Campbell's insight. He embodied it while resisting reduction. And this is one reason why Tolkien's myths feel lived in and not just schematic. Remythologization is not regression, it's recovery. Because all of this is not about abandoning reason or rejecting science or returning to superstition. It's about restoring a lost layer of interpretation. Modern people often live in a flattened world, facts without meaning, data without story, power without purpose. Remythologization is the recovery of symbolic literacy, the ability to read reality at more than one depth. Tolkien's Seventh Age idea is doing exactly this. History stays intact, science stays authoritative, but meaning returns to the narrative frame. So when folks just say it's just myth, here's what they're actually confessing. I only know how to recognize one kind of truth. That's not skepticism, that's impoverishment. And Tolkien and Campbell and Eliade and Leet and many others, they're trying to say there are truths that cannot survive being reduced without being destroyed. So how does this connect back to Tolkien? He's not asking us to remythologize history by denying facts. He is asking us to remythologize meaning. Middle-earth is not a replacement for archaeology. It's a grammar for significance. And since that grammar is restored, the guffawing stops. Not because skeptics are defeated, but because the question itself changes. I'm not trying to argue people into belief. I'm reintroducing a forgotten way of reading reality. And that, frankly, is much more interesting. For most of human history, myth was not opposed to truth. It was opposed to chronicle. So this reframes the entire modern misunderstanding in one stroke. Chronicle answers the questions, what happened, when, and to whom. Myth answers why it mattered and why it still matters. For ancient medieval thinkers, those were complementary, not competing issues. The opposition of myth versus fact is a post-Enlightenment habit, not a timeless rule. That's why this feels like a revelation. It restores an older mental map. This is why Tolkien is such a delight to read. We're not inventing a new category. Tolkien did not invent a new category. It's recovering an old one. Tolkien as well did not oppose myth to truth. He opposed myth compared to mechanistic explanation and disenchanted historiography. So that's why he hated allegory, but he loved applicability. See, applicability is myth doing its proper work. It's not dictating facts, but it's orienting meaning. Middle-earth is not a chronicle of our past. It is a mythic depth map laid beneath our history. One of the great modern misunderstandings is thinking that myth is the opposite of truth. But for most of history, it wasn't. Myth was not opposed to truth. It was opposed to chronicle. Chronicle tells you what happened. Myth tells you why it mattered. Tolkien knew that distinction instinctively, and he built Middle-earth to operate at that level, not as a competing history, but as a deeper one. That's not defensive, that's clarifying. This sudden clarity where confusion dissolves makes us realize, oh, we've been asking the wrong question. What Tolkien does is restore mythic literacy, which gives people a way to read again at a depth they didn't know they were missing. That's exactly what Tolkien hoped for when he spoke of applicability. That's exactly why myth still works. He's not saying, believe this. He's saying, look again. There's more here than you were taught to notice. And this isn't even about arguing people into belief either. It's about reintroducing a forgotten way of reading reality. And this reframes the entire conversation from the assertion versus refutation system to the literacy versus illiteracy issues. It's not about moral superiority or intellectual dominance. It's about this. Have we forgotten how to read? Truth, when it's named correctly, feels like relief. And this is restoring a mode of perception which our modernity flattened. Tolkien is not about selling a worldview or sneaking in a theology or asking for credulity. No, he's offering depth back to reality. And people want that, even if they don't yet know how to ask for it. This isn't about convincing anyone what to believe. It's about remembering how to read the world. Tolkien wasn't writing fantasy to escape reality. He was restoring a way of seeing reality we forgot how to read, since myth isn't the opposite of truth. It's the language truth uses when facts aren't enough. So thanks for being here on The Backyard Professor. I will return with much more just as soon as I can.